Well, speaking after Adnan and all these very impressive facts, applied findings to an anthropologist might sound a bit intimidating. Well, what we've done here, it's really that Adnan moved kind of from purely hardcore economics approach to something that's going in the direction of an anthropologist thinking. And I've done the opposite. On the other hand, I actually have done the opposite. So using anthropology to look at some economic trends and also to challenge a series of stereotypes relating to migration, to investments, to who are people in diaspora, who are people investing here, how these transactions take place, and the role, of course, of informality within the complex formal systems in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we are looking well, the core kind of phenomenon we are exploring here is migration, but not migration just in terms of pure people on the move, where they go, why they go, and so on. We are looking at different types of migration that are also return migration, but not necessarily a complete return, where people go, Gastarbeiters in the past would go to Germany, spend lifetime there working and then come back and to retirement. So there are all sort of different mobilities these days that are not necessarily linear or one directional, but multi-directional and happening simultaneously. Migrations are still very much a dominant issue here in the region. So every day you read different figures about young people migrating, tens of thousands of people escaping, and it's kind of presented in a very dramatic way as something very bad and something to be worried about. Of course, every state, every society should know what happens, what are the trends, but migration is not necessarily to be seen in traditional ways as losing people, as brain drain, that someone is gaining and someone is losing. There is more kind of brain circulation, where people go, they learn skills, they acquire all sort of capitals, but they don't disappear. Most of them don't. So they are all sort of connections that they keep maintaining with their home countries, home communities, family members, and so on. And this creates completely new realities, new trends, new sort of networks that are based very often on very traditional networks, some of those that we heard in the first two sessions, as Klaus explained in the example of Montenegro, for example. We are focusing on Bosnia, but the Bosnian example is really a region-wide phenomenon over here. So what we looked, and this is an ethnographic study which I will talk a bit about, we looked how these connections, what happens with who are the investors in local communities. So talking economy is kind of really the kind of a core area of our project. We wanted to see, because it's applied, it's benefiting people, and it's very concrete. So we looked who are these investors in some of the communities. And of course then after finding who they were, we then looked follow them where they came from, why did they invest there, who are the people they employed, how their presence in these local communities affecting those local communities, and we came with some amazing stories. So we did, and we selected two communities which I will talk about, or two businesses. The only quantitative representation of Bosnian immigration, of course, they're always estimates and they change, but there are literally millions of Bosnians outside of Bosnia, and there are millions of people from the region who are EU citizens, as we know. They are also, US citizens, Australian citizens, but they are the big capital that the region has, the Western Balkans, are European citizens of their origin who are not just fifth generation, but they are very often first generation. But before going into this, well, but we had to decide what to look at, so to also make it relevant to the project, not just to come up with some interesting inspirational stories, but really to look at how informal practices, how people define them, what are they, in relation to migration. So most people do not migrate through some very structured formal systems, but through informal networks, through connections, something known as chain migration, where family members and local communities or someone they knew settled in a village in Switzerland, and somehow the whole village from Bosnia over a period of 10 years ends up there. Not whole, but significant numbers. So there's a kind of literal translocality where locality from a region moves across the globe and then gets reconstructed. It's not new to this region or to this time. So there have been chain migration trends for as long as migration has been in existence, especially those where diaspora communities get formed. We looked at the practices, how this works. We look at the networks, who is involved in networks. And being anthropologists, both Nirha and I looked how to capture what's happening there. So we went to different events or looked at events. When do they happen? What are some specific things that take place there? And of course, something that is then applied, employment, migration trends and patterns, resettlement, where the people did go, the rate of citizenship, dual citizenship or European EU citizenship and so on. Remittances, something that's very dominating the kind of any discussion about the migration is how much money is being sent there. And then it's seen as diaspora is of some value because there is money coming, which is, as many studies have confirmed, not really the best way to support your local community or your country because it does go on consumption very often. We used ethnography, which meant we spend or we maintain contacts for up to 9 months, and we still have contacts with the people that we worked with. We interview them through formal, in-depth, semi-structured interviews, but also talked with people who were connected to the stories that we had to talk about. And I skipped some of them because I talk about refugees, and I deleted some slides about pictures of refugees, those people, desperate people escaping violence, so on. So, well, I'm here as a member of Bosnian diaspora. I'm very proud to proclaim that Bosnia has the most beautiful diaspora. So they might be, Slovenians might be smarter, but Bosnians have the most beautiful diaspora. Living in Australia, it feels good, having in 2 years Miss of Australia, the whole continent. It's bigger than Europe. They are Bosnian refugees, former Bosnian refugees. There's Esma and there's Monica. Monica is from Zavidovići. That's where my friend Adnan comes from. And so, and Esma is actually, her parents are, one is from Gradačac, one from Sarajevo, but these are refugees. Well known and closer to home probably, Aida, another beautiful member of Bosnian diaspora, is Minister for Education, or used to be Minister for Education in Sweden. And it's not some kind of diaspora club out there where they are community leaders dancing, kolo, and that's kind of, these are the perception of diaspora very often from here. These people are very sophisticated here, young women who are doing who are part of mainstream, and they are competing in every regard, including the beauty, with everyone else. So not with the
no beautiful men in the Bosnian diaspora.
They do business. Yeah. And I didn't want to have too many handsome men here. Well, just kind of really to to move away from refugee as something that's the people are fixed and they are need to be patronized, sympathized with. People, have their agencies. People have not been stuck in some refugee status. People have learned languages, have gone to school, have embraced all the opportunities, very often much more than the mainstream. In the example of Sweden, for example, the rate of young Bosnians attaining higher education is within the comparable to Swedish citizens. So more than say Finnish diaspora or Finnish migrants in over there. Of course, the refugee experience probably had something to do with that because they didn't have luxury of falling back on parents supporting them and so on. The areas, that's the map which I very dislike because I know the maps from before the war, and this one is the ethnic map, not the ethnic, the entity map of Bosnia and Herzegovina. we looked at Banja Luka and Srebrenica as two communities, or two returnees who returned to these communities and then invested significant money in business, but not in just to give money away. They are Swedish and Swiss businessmen who are thinking about their money. They're not just throwing money away. So Banja Luka is the west, in the western part of the country, is the most developed city or the region in that part of Bosnia. Srebrenica, known for atrocities, genocide, all sort of issues that are not necessarily seen as business opportunity to anyone, and probably no one would invest there. But those, someone who is from there will think about investing in Srebrenica. And here the handsome man, for the rich man, the rich Bosnian man. We got beautiful women and rich Bosnian men. The guys on the picture here, is Emir Sobo in the middle. It's Nirha and I conducted a series of interviews and contacts with him and visited his site, business. He is a very rich Swede, and he is also a Bosnian. He was 14 years old when he, was forced to flee, to leave his hometown of Banja Luka, and through chain migration, they resettled. The whole Banja Luka is in Sweden, as people would know who have family members or who done research. So Sweden is full of people from Banja Luka. So Emir Sobo completed a university degree there, was working as taxi driver, and then learned the business, and then developed one of the largest transport company in that part of Sweden, Norrköping and 3 other large areas in that part of Sweden. Sobo, that was an award he received up there, which he's holding. It's a transport company, but not only dealing with taxis. And this is kind of a story in itself. Emir Sobo has 500 employees for 42 nations. Those based in Sweden. It's a multi-million euro port company. It's also publicly listed. Not very good screen, but it's using the latest technology you can imagine about how to move people from A to B. And what happened, Emir Sobo decided then to outsource part of his company. And what happens, as we know, everyone is going to China, and maybe Chinese might outsource to Bosnia in the region. But Emir Sobo outsourced part of his business to Banja Luka, because he was from Banja Luka. He did not kind of fit the stereotype of traumatized refugee who wouldn't go ethnically homogeneous, Republika Srpska. He went there and used his networks, his friends from before the war, also both the social and cultural capital of people who returned from Sweden, people from Bosnia, from Banja Luka, who returned, who learned Swedish and learned skills and wanted to go home. So Emir Sobo employed his friend Milan as director, and there are 42 nations. Several of those are present in his company in Banja Luka, and this is the building. He introduced Swedish standards of working, flexible hours, IT technology of the cutting edge, benefits according to Swedish standards again. Being good corporate citizen, Emir Sobo's company is supporting local soccer clubs, humanitarian events, childcare, and so on. So Emir Sobo has become one of very popular guys in Banja Luka, employing people, paying tax, giving away his money, and making a fortune. People working in Banja Luka are navigating any call for people in Sweden who, up there in cities in the north who want to move from one place to another. The call goes, or the request goes to Banja Luka. So that's the hub of communication hub for his company. Also, he moved kind of the brain of his company to Banja Luka, dealing with accounting and other kind of business matters of his business is done there. So operational bit is still in Sweden, but the brain of his company is in Banja Luka. And he loves it. He loves being back. He has great lifestyle. We chased him for months because he would go to Greece to watch soccer game, then he would end up somewhere else. It doesn't mean that he's just enjoying himself. He's a very serious businessman, but he employed people who also can do things, and he loves being back. So this is from the website, and you see Swedish taxi, Banja Luka service, and so on. And he's not popular among the his own ethnic group. He's very popular guy in Banja Luka. Another story, a story from Srebrenica. So I don't need to dwell on Srebrenica and why people left there. It's well known, and sadly, something that's going to take a few generations to be very relevant too. But this guy is, could be seen as a poor refugee who survived genocide, was 10 years old, and he's somewhere in Sweden. But this guy is a businessman, very serious businessman in Switzerland. So after surviving Srebrenica, ending up in Sweden through combination, literally those chain migration, learning trade, and then starting his own company, he made a fortune there. He's still very active there. Rather than returning as a rich migrant, he brought part of his business back and invested in hospitality. So the largest building in Srebrenica, in the center of the town, is Hotel Alić. That's his surname. So he made a kind of statement, I'm back here, and he is employing local people in the local community and also supporting several other local businesses through supply companies, chain, and so on. And they are, of course, companies that are owned by different people of different ethnic backgrounds. Something that we'll emphasize at the end, and something that Adnan has talked about. Also, he's discovering very beautiful part of Bosnia, which is literally on the border with Serbia, by building the first motel in that area, the first actually that ever existed there. And there's also probably the only covered swimming pool in the whole of Podrinje region, literally on Drina, so there's water up there as well. A bit of extravaganza, but he's not just making statement, I'm back here, I've got money. He's literally supporting local communities there and creating a new narrative. When we talk about Srebrenica, about returnees, it's not only returning there once a year, but returning to live and returning to work. So the key findings, I'll move on to this. What we found is that informal practices, unlike some formal institutions, do cross ethnic divide. So Bosniaks invest in Republika Srpska. Bosniaks employ people who are there, their local community. And the formal divide does not matter to them. People will use informal networks to actually bypass those. These networks and these new situations have created new possibilities and connections for people from EU. These people are EU investors. And they have created they use knowledge and about the Bosnian market. And it's at both ends of migration paths. So there's people in Sweden are benefiting, and Swedish embassy here in Sarajevo has recognized this. They organize events where they promote businesses between Sweden and Bosnia, and all these businesses are actually by people from Bosnia who are now Swedish citizens. So other countries can learn from that. We are not talking here about any kind of corruption or something that's undermining the system. It's actually giving an example to the formal institutions how people can work together, how they can do business, and how they can pay tax and do everything else in a legitimate way, and they complement formal institutions. What's very important in the context of Bosnia and the region is that the presence of these businesses have had positive effects on inter-ethnic relationships in Bosnia. And these are stories we hear from Banja Luka. This is a story we hear from Srebrenica, and of course there are many similar stories across Bosnia. So it's not really that returning migrants, that over there in diaspora, they're all nationalists. They are in their clubs, and when they come here, they will make trouble. These people have accumulated all sort of capitals, including financial capital, but more importantly, they have learned what a citizen they are to expect. So they are not intimidated by rigid bureaucracies and corruption, but they know, that they have money and they can do what they want to do as long as it's legal. And to conclude in my last 7 seconds, informal networks can compensate for discrimination and contribute to social cohesion in the country. That's been the case in both these companies, and especially in Banja Luka, it's a larger company where some ethnic minorities who do not feature within the 3 constitutive peoples, like Ukrainians and others, are actually very happily working in these companies, and they don't need to match the quotas of belonging to an ethnic group that's recognized as constitutive peoples. I hope that you will have many questions and comments and say good things about our presentation and our work. But thank you very much for your attention.